Hello. Sorry, it's been a bit of time. But yeah, today I wanted to talk about one of my favourite books, and it only became one of my favourites in the past couple of years, because growing up I was actually a bit too young when this TV show, which is an adaptation of these books, was exploding and was becoming the big thing, and that being Game of Thrones. And more specific today, I'm talking about Fire and Blood. George.R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood came out more recently, back in 2018, I believe. 2018, 2017. I only picked this up for about 6 months ago, and it's quickly become one of my favourite books. Me, I can relate it almost back to English history, and I think it's pretty obvious that's where George.R.R. Martin gets a lot of his inspiration from. And you can tell because in Fire and Blood we get a snapshot and we get real in-depth look at certain points in the Targaryen's history of Westeros, from Aegon the Conqueror all the way up to Aegon the Third. That's where the in-depth part sort of dies down after that. In this we can see the peaks and troughs, the humanity, the humility, and the destruction of the Targaryen dynasty. But today I don't want to talk about the Targaryens or Fire and Blood per se as a book. I want to talk about why it's actually a warning. In a world where we're increasingly becoming more and more closer to the ideologies of the past, George.R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood sort of serves as a warning, but not in the way that you think. Because you see, much like how when William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel from France into England and went on to conquer English soil, the Targaryens through Aegon the Conqueror with their dragons went on to submit the whole realm within 2 years. Alongside 2 of his sister wives, yes, it gets really weird, Aegon the Conqueror managed to wield with sheer force and fire and blood the world of Westeros that we see today. In Targaryen rule, we see how what started out as a good ruling dynasty and one that was much needed in a very divided world ended up becoming more and more destructive. Now, that's not to say that Aegon the Conqueror, or even, I'll talk about next, G.R.R. the Conciliator, were amazing people, but what they did do is they did rule in a very interesting way, one which helped keep the realm together. For them, they were just focused on their dragon dream of what was to happen in the future. They were focused on their bloodline, and they were focused on keeping the realm together. Those were the main 3 points. Because in between, of course, you have Aenys, and then you have Maegor. Sorry, I almost got that wrong. You have Maegor between Aegon the Conqueror and G.R.R. the Conciliator. And then it becomes downhill from G.R.R. the Conciliator, which is interesting because he is the king I want to touch on the most. Having ruled and being seen as the greatest king in Westerosi history, G.R.R. the Conciliator managed to keep the realm at peace for over 60 years. And before his death, he made a brutal error. Because you see, what George.R.R. Martin shows is that despite all the great kings doing good things, they also have their setbacks. And G.R.R.'s was that he could not have a good relationship with his kids, and more specifically the daughters in his family. He did not respect them. Much like how Aegon the Conqueror would end up ruling in a way which would have some downside, G.R.R. the Conciliator made this fatal error, and instead of putting his daughter on the throne, he left it up to a vote. And this is where we get the Dance of the Dragons, as you know, the TV show, and Viserys the First. So in this, what I'd like to touch on is this. What can we learn as a civilization from the Targaryens or Westeros? Because even George.R.R. Martin, with his writing, he lets it play out how the character would play it out, not how he wants it to play out, which gets a bit confusing. But like the great writers, I believe that they let the story tell themselves, not forcing the story itself. What we see is a dynasty, and what we see is greed, lust, a want for more. The Targaryens go on to destroy their dynasty almost through one person. But in saying that, even that in itself is wrong, because the destruction of the dynasty of the Targaryens happened over generations, almost beginning with the Dance of the Dragons, where they nearly took out their whole family and extinguished dragons, technically. I'll come back to that later. All the way up to Rhaegar's decision to call Lyanna the most beautiful girl in Westeros and take Lyanna Stark from Robert Baratheon. And what we find is that the decision for Rhaegar to go after Lyanna Stark and elope with Lyanna Stark and then have a baby with Lyanna Stark, who was at the time with Robert Baratheon, would cause Robert Rebellion. And in that, Robert himself becomes the first non-Targaryen king to sit the Iron Throne in ever. And in that, what we find is that, well, empires rise, empires fall, dynasties climb, dynasties get extinguished, but what's left is the death, destruction, and the constant rebuilding from a few people. Fire and Blood serves as an amazing book for people who love the idea of history, dynasties. It also serves as a warning. What happens when few people have too much? Apologies for the lack of content recently. Just had a lot going on, and so yeah, I want to try and rectify that. But yeah, I have a poetry book which I wrote a year ago. I've got a website, Instagram page, and yeah, obviously it's a YouTube channel, so if you want to support, then that would be amazing. Yeah, hope you stick along.